All right, we are now in a final stretch. You have been through a lot of nutrition education and gained a lot of insight. And what we hope to do in this final stretch is wrap it all up for you and put it into terms that we're really going to have actionable tips, ideas, and techniques, both from a numerical and a visual perspective. So we're going to start off with a label reading driven lesson here that wraps up the 5 core most important components of understanding nutrition when it comes to metabolic health. Go then right into a lesson on grocery shopping, which is a place you can really apply such. Then into dining out, which is going to happen for virtually all of us, and to try to avoid it and not discuss it and focus everything on just recipes and what we'll be making at home, which of course we would like to do more of, but will still include some eating out would be inappropriate. So we're going to discuss dining out. And then we'll get into a couple of pictorial lessons on breakfast and snack ideas and lunch and dinner ideas. All right. Now let's just review those 5 core and straightforward, powerful nutrition guidelines. Number 1, beverage calories. We're talking about thin liquid beverages, whether it is a sugar sweetened pop or it is a creamed coffee frappuccino, or if it's an alcoholic drink, or even if it's fruit juice versus a whole fruit. We know those calories don't induce much, if any, fullness, and therefore we are going to be left far more hungry with those type of calories versus more solid or even soft food based calories. And then when it comes to food, we need to know that there's a certain weight of food per day that we typically need to satisfy our hunger, and that foods range from less than 100 calories per pound to 4,000 calories per pound, basically going from our leafy green and cruciferous vegetables all the way to oils, right? So you can say basically from broccoli to butter and oils, and that there is a huge amount of variation that we can absolutely be able to eat lots of food and cut calories, in other words, to be able to address hunger and be able to easily get leaner with little hunger at all, if any. If it's certainly adverse and uncomfortable levels of hunger easily can be addressed by understanding calorie density, or calories per bite of food, if you like. Another term might be calorie concentration. I think that's probably an easier way. Some things are very concentrated in terms of calories, more calories per bite, but the technical term is calorie density, so I want you to know that. And directly related to that, probably the number 1 and 2 nutrients for concern of excess are both calories and sodium. And there's a beautiful irony that we'll talk about in this lesson that make the evaluation of a food when looking at a label for calorie density and sodium density, or sodium per bite of food, almost exactly the same. So it's very easy. It's a 1-2 punch that will improve your health dramatically. Talk about becoming a lifestyle warrior. 1-2 punch for your health. Fourthly, we combined fiber from naturally occurring fiber and protein together because of their common potential in terms of staying full. Okay, so the concept of calorie density, less calories per bite, and having a large weight of food that has a lot of water content, for instance, on average for the whole meal, a lot of water inside the food to get us full for less calories, is about getting full on less calories. Whereas protein and fiber might be best thought of as staying full. Getting full, staying full, slightly different, complementary to each other, okay? And we'll talk about a way to, for those who track food or look at labels, to use a concept called the PF10, which we've discussed, but we're going to repeat here, to quickly quality assess any meal or any entire day's worth of food if you're tracking in a food tracker. It's one of the best shortcuts proprietary to the Reality Meets Science system that I have ever seen, and goes beyond macro assessment, just protein, carbs, and fats, actually does better than that and adds quality, not just quantity, by putting in the fiber. I'll show you more. And then lastly, but not least, the easiest but very powerful concept of saturated fat and cholesterol. So yes, calories and sodium Excess, definitely the biggest drivers and concern for excess. But saturated fat and cholesterol, those issues that really drive up cholesterol in the bloodstream and can increase the potential for plaques, cholesterol containing plaques in the arteries to form that drive heart attack and stroke, must be considered, and that's number 5. Okay? Now, understanding food through nutrition facts, which are available on containers of food, they're available online when you look up foods, for instance, even for a restaurant, can eventually help us understand food beyond when we might even have a nutrition facts label. By using the opportunity of understanding the value of a nutrition facts label, we can definitely take that information and understanding and apply it for when there is no nutrition fact label available. Okay, so it's not just all about when there's a nutrition fact there. You can learn a lot just by looking at them and then applying the knowledge you've learned from them outside of when you may even have one. Now, beyond the nutrition facts we see on a lot of foods on the front box, on the front of the box or container, all kinds of health claims. That is marketing. We don't really benefit from them. If anything, we tend to give a health halo effect to foods that have healthy sounding advertisements when they really don't deserve such. So don't trust the health claims on the front of a package. We're going to learn to look at the labels in a simple way that will tell us the truth and give us far more impact and benefit for our health. Okay? All right, so let's start with number 1. Thin liquid beverage calories. Review. Remember, they basically run through the stomach way too quickly. Think about 5 oranges that it would take to make a glass of orange juice, how easy it would be to drink that, easily eat your breakfast afterwards. Then you think about trying to eat 5 oranges in a row. And as we've said, by number 3, you begin to think you're on candid camera and wonder if you're in an orange eating contest. That is a simple, practical, and easy way to understand the difference between a thin liquid beverage that runs right through the stomach, doesn't provide enough time for the substance to stay in the stomach, applying its weight there and causing stretch receptors in the stomach to fire and send a signal through the vagus nerve to our brain that we're full. Whereas oranges do. They sit there in their semi-solid state and really apply that weight for a while, slowly exiting the stomach and providing that sustained weight and stretch receptor firing to signal fullness is a very different effect eating oranges versus drinking orange juice or any, for instance, whole fruit versus juice. But it applies to all thin liquid beverages that have calories, whether it be cream-based coffees, whether it be alcohol, whether it be sugar, the issue is the same. So we're not saying don't have them, but understand the risk in terms of managing hunger. You're not going to detect the calories nearly as well from a thin liquid beverage. But if it's in your 5% fun zone or you understand the risk and it's a non-negotiable, well, you're an informed consumer. All right? So just consider thin liquid beverage calories kind of the same as very high calorie density foods because they don't trigger much, if any, fullness for the amount of calories they provide. Caveat, and we'll discuss a bit about meal replacements in the grocery shopping lesson, we're not talking about thick protein-based meal replacements, really properly designed thick shakes that are based on protein and fiber, for instance. Sometimes commercially as simple as even a, for instance, product like Slim Fast High Protein. Because many proteins, particularly dairy protein like casein, actually are not only thick, not thin, but when we drink them, when they mix with our digestive juices, particularly the acidity of the stomach, they actually kind of turn semi-solid. And therefore, it is a different type of beverage when we're talking about a thick protein or fiber-rich beverage, particularly if it is a protein-rich beverage where you have, for instance, a protein powder that you're mixing with some frozen berries and you keep it in a thick slurry and you replace something like a very high calorie density, low fiber, high saturated fat, sodium fast food breakfast. It's clearly going to be a better choice in that regard. Okay. Also in terms of broth-based soups. So broth-based soups, for whatever reason, we're still trying to figure out are kind of like a food you can drink. But most of those broth-based soups are full of vegetables and legumes, for instance, or even pasta, which is technically cooked in water, so it's got less calories per bite than bread, which is dry, because at least the pasta has some water in it. So a minestrone, for instance. But if you've got a soup that's based on vegetables and beans or peas, you know, you've got something in which the broth is a different animal, so to speak, but even better, you've got the beans and the peas and the vegetables. And I'd recommend, if you remember, eating that soup with a fork so that you can get more of the solid out of it and actually save some of the salt by letting the broth seep through. All right. It's just a little pictorial, just to remind us, right? We want to get visual. We're talking about a lot of numbers, but we also want to keep, for people who are not so number friendly, or even if you are, it always helps anyway to have some visual perspective. There's your creamed coffees in the upper left. We obviously know about the biggest contributor, the sugar-based beverages like soda pop, but fruit juices versus whole fruit, right? And of course, alcoholic beverages. Now, moving on to the calorie density. We're digging a little deeper in each of these 5. This is number 2. This is the 2 of the 5 criteria. Calorie density of foods. Foods range from well under 100 calories up to 4,000 calories per pound, and so therefore we can easily find 3 to 4 pounds of food per day that can get us full for far less calories. And we can still have whatever our non-negotiables are, because it's the total average that matters of our food choices, not every single food. But we need to know where to apply portion control and where, if anything, we shouldn't worry about portion control and we should eat far more freely. Foods that have, for instance, high water and high fiber content, because they get us full on less calories, because those things, particularly water, but also fiber, which also helps with staying full, but contributes in terms of weight and getting us full without calories. All right? Also keep in mind that many foods with high calorie density, think chips, tortilla chips, potato chips, don't even come anywhere near confusing a whole potato or a baked potato with potato chips, have incredibly unrealistic serving sizes. You've heard the commercial, bet you can't eat just one. Yeah, of course you can't eat just one chip, because your body doesn't even detect that there's anything in there, but it's packing a ton of calories. Think of a baked potato, which the liquid it's full of is water, and you replace that, extract all the water and replace it with oil. In other words, you deep fry it. You've gone from the 0-calorie wonderful nutrient of water to oil, which has the highest calories per bite. And I eat some chips, don't get me wrong. Look, I understand. Believe me, being realistic. But in terms of the amount and frequency, having that knowledge allows you to find a balance to when you really want it the most, or when it's non-negotiable. Okay? Now, in terms of why calorie and sodium density are so similar and so easy, there's a beautiful irony. That is that we need about 2,000 grams of food per day on average to feel full. A little more or less depending on the person, but work with me here. About 2,000 grams. There's good evidence behind this, that the weight of food is a critical component to managing our hunger. And we need about somewhere around that 2,000 gram range. And ironically, we should be striving, if you, I think, find the best balance, the World Health Organization would recommend less than 2,000 milligrams of sodium per day. That is a perfect irony that allows us to make looking at calorie density and sodium density in terms of low, medium, and high, or very high, those 4 levels, the same. And makes it real quick to look at 2 of the most important things on a label, and we'll show you in a moment. Okay? So how do you look at this? Before we actually look at a label, you're going to prepare your mind in this fashion, right? We want to compare the calories and the sodium to the weight of the food. And that weight is right there on all the labels. Good news for you, don't worry, the weight, the number that you probably don't know exists, maybe you do, but many of you don't, know that it exists on a label, exists. And it's really important, and it's there for everyone. And in fact, in the new FDA-approved nutrition fact labels, the weight of the food is going to be even easier to see. And for those of you that know where to look, sometimes you have to look on the front of the box or the bag. You'll still find a weight somewhere. Heck, even if you're at Panera and you look in the back and you see calories and no weight, you look on the front of the box and you'll find the weight. Okay? We're going to find that weight, and we need to find the weight in grams. The gram weight is almost always there. And by the way, if it does happen to say ounces, which is almost always the only other thing that might be stated, whether in the nutrition facts label or on the front of the box, an ounce is 30 grams. Simple. If it says 2 ounces, that's 60 grams. But usually you'll see the actual gram weight sitting right there, and I'll show you in just a moment, in the nutrition facts label area without having to do the math of 30 grams per ounce. All right? By knowing the concept of calorie and sodium density, you will be able to identify and find foods that you like in a blend and a mixture overall that will give you lots of food, lots of flavor, lots of happiness and hunger control for a lot less calories and sodium. So the idea that you need to eat less, or they say eat less, move more. I'm happy for move more, but eat less, actually not correct. If anything, you'll find that you can eat as much, if not more, in terms of food volume and weight while cutting calories when you understand this concept. So before we go into breaking into numbers and labels, I wanted to show a little pictorial here. Just look at some of these food choices and think. Upper left, what have we done here? Well, instead of getting fries, I got a baked potato with my trout and had some nice steamed broccoli. I didn't have them put any salt on the fish. I allowed them to put a little bit of salt for my 5% fun zone on the potato. Put all of the sauces on the side, and there you go. Not an extremist approach. I can taste what I want instead of having them slather all of the sauces that have more calories and oil and salt than I would want and I'd prefer to have control of. They're on the side. I can still have them, but in a way that I want, not the way that the restaurant says that I want. It's not hard asking for this, and we'll talk about this during the dining out lesson. The top middle picture, there's a pizza. Okay, I am a board certified pizza-aholic. There are places, not all the time, but hey, this is an opportunity to give you a very ultra thin crust option. We know that's where the calorie and sodium density is in the crust, so why not, if you have the opportunity and you enjoy it that way, which I don't mind, I just need a little bit of crust, a little bit of bread, to order it that way with light cheese and lots of extra vegetables. In fact, I think in that particular picture I ordered it without any cheese, but to be clear, it's a 50-50 crapshoot with me. I might order it light cheese, I might order it no cheese. Whatever the case may be, I like to definitely leverage the vegetables up. On the upper right is just me getting fancy. This isn't something I eat often, but I want to just show you, I would like you to think outside the box. There's a combination of just some frozen edamame, which are relatively bland, but provide a lot of chew and protein and fiber and potassium. And I mixed them with a lentil-based dish called mujadra from a restaurant that had more oil and salt than I would usually like to have. So dilution is the solution, diluted by mixing them both. They both have very flavor-compatible profiles because they're both legumes, beans and lentils. And yeah, I even thought I'd throw in some dry roasted pistachios in there. So there you go. There's a high-fiber, healthy, vegan, if you will, snack that I came up with, just simple and easy, if you will, out of nowhere. In the middle left, you see a high-fiber bread that has no sodium added. Ezekiel, one of my favorites. When toasted, crunchy, it's great. It's bland. Why? Because of the lack of salt. Okay? But when you put a cottage cheese on top, or at least one that's not maybe necessarily dramatically high in salt, because most cottage cheeses are, you've got plenty of salt flavor in that cottage cheese. In fact, the cottage cheese I used there was a brand called Friendship that has no salt added, but since I had some jelly on top, I didn't miss or need a salt flavor anyway. So I had a quick, simple snack. Low calorie density with the cottage cheese, high in water and protein. Maybe a bit more calorie dense with the bread, but as high in fiber as you could get and really good chew, especially when it's toasted crunchy. And then some smart, no sugar added, just a little bit of Splenda, no sugar added Smucker's jelly, which is a great quick snack, one of my favorite things to do. I could go on and on with these, but I think the one that I'll focus on the most here is the meal replacement. So you see that I made a smoothie made with a protein powder. My favorite product is called Z-Pro. It's a medical formula. You usually can't or shouldn't get it outside of a medical program. Some people sell it online. Nevertheless, to me, Z-Pro Vanilla is one of the best blends of fast and slow release protein out there. It comes in a sachet. I just blended it together with a little bit of unsweetened soy milk and some strawberries and whipped it up into a smoothie that was quick and easy and I could run out the door with. So there's an example of a thick beverage, not a thin beverage. Happy to take any questions about these during our live sessions, and I think it's a nice pictorial. Now, getting into some of the numbers. We'll be able to see these numbers when looking at a nutrition facts label, when looking online at a restaurant that has their nutrition information online. There are many opportunities to look at calories and weight of food. Yes, all of the larger chains are required to have nutrition information available. You can easily go onto Google and look up whatever chain it is, Wendy's and nutrition, Starbucks and nutrition, and you'll find the official website. You'd like to use the company's own website, not necessarily some other commercial company that might have the numbers inaccurate or not up to date, or Panera and nutrition. You will be able to find their websites, nutrition facts, quite readily and easily. Or if you're grocery shopping, for sure, you're able to look at labels. Let's learn. When you see the calories and then you compare it to the weight, which is right there in the serving size section, and I'll show you in a moment, just believe me, there is the weight in grams. When the calories, let's say they are 60, are less than the weight of the food, let's say the weight is 110 grams, that 60 calories is very few calorie dollars for a relative large amount of food. The gram weight is higher at 110 than the calories. That is not a food to worry about portion controlling. That food, for instance, if you were to eat a pound, which is about 450 grams, so 4 servings of that, right? A pound would be 60 times 4, 240 calories for a pound of food. Hardly a food that we need to worry that much about in terms of portion control. You can pack 240 calories is less than half of a Starbucks brownie, just to give you an idea. And that is going to be a tiny, probably maybe 40 gram serving. Okay, so you've gone from 400 grams down to 40, and you're obviously not going to be nearly as full on 40 grams for 240 calories as 440 grams. All right? So particularly if you're using the hunger scale, which we have discussed in terms of stopping when comfortably full, and of course not allowing yourself to get too hungry and understanding early hunger. These foods are definitely not in the zone to be concerned with. And of course, virtually, not all, but virtually all of your whole fruits and vegetables fall into this category. Okay? At 1 to 2 calories per gram, here maybe we're talking about some type of a guacamole, or speaking of exceptions of fruits, avocado, or a hummus, depending on how much tahini they're adding. It could be medium to high calorie density, but something that falls in the medium zone has calories that are higher than the serving size but not double. So let's switch the numbers we just said. 110 calories, right? 110 calories for 60 grams or even 70. Either way, the calories are less than double the serving size, but they're more than the serving size. That's in the medium calorie density zone. And in that zone, you have to decide on whether that food has any particular hunger controlling redeeming value. Like if it's very chewy, it might be something that is, really still helps with getting full on less calories, because chewing really does help in terms of hunger hormone control. But if it's something that slithers down your throat, like a guacamole or hummus, particularly if it's hyper palatable due to all the salt that's added, this might be a zone in which some portion control and frequency control can be thought of at a moderate level. You want to consider it to some degree. But the threshold in which we want to be more vigilant, not rule out, just think about portion and frequency control. That's all. Not yes or no. This is not a diet, but it's when the calories, and as you'll see soon, the sodium, but in this case, the calories are more than double the serving size. So if we get into, for instance, a 200 calorie serving for something that weighs only 60 grams, you're now in a high calorie density zone, right? The 200 calories are more than double the serving size. Haven't reached the very high zone of more than quadruple the serving size, but certainly are in the high zone, and there's definitely a portion control issue, which might be driven by an environmental control issue, right? So in terms of portion control, you might think about using a smaller bowl. For instance, if it's cereal, you might decide to use, okay, I'm going to use a small coffee mug rather than my big bowls. Or it could be a frequency control issue in which you say, look, this is in my life, but it's not in my face. I'm just not going to buy this for the house on a regular basis. I might buy it once in a while, or I might buy it on exception, and I'm definitely going to enjoy it when I do, but it's too tempting otherwise if it's in my face. Or move it to a place, for instance, that is less accessible in the pantry or in the refrigerator versus foods that have much more easy access that gets you full on less calories, like fruits and vegetables that are out in a bowl, on your kitchen counter, or up in your obvious space in the refrigerator where you can see it as soon as you open it, rather than stuck in a crisper where you forget about those apples for 4 months. Last but not least, you already see the very high calorie density zone. The big point here is when the calories are more than quadruple the serving size, there is a combination, by definition here, of dry and fatty, because the only calories that have more than 4 calories per gram in the food world is fat. Protein has 4 calories per gram, dry protein. Dry carbs like sugar and starch have 4 calories per gram, and fat has 9. So if something's over 4 calories per gram, there has to be a significant amount of fat, and typically also very dry. To get something to less than 1 calorie per gram, when you now know that protein and carbs dry have 4 calories per gram, fat has 9, it's got to have a lot of water in it. There's got to be a lot of water, but that water's in the food, okay? Think of grapes, not raisins. You can't eat raisins, drink water, and pray they turn back into grapes. It doesn't work like that. Water's got to be in the food, either from nature, that's roots in the ground, fruits and vegetables, or by cooking, that would be your legumes, your beans, lentils, and peas, and grains, preferably whole grains, but any grain, whether it's white pasta or whole wheat pasta, for instance, you will have the water weight added by cooking. And I want to emphasize that with the beans, lentils, and peas and grain group, when you're looking at the serving size there, it's typically the dry weight, unless it's in a can, it's already cooked. But if you're looking at a bean that's dry, or let's say a grain, whether it's farro or brown rice or quinoa or oatmeal, whatever, that's dry, when you cook it, you're going to wonder, well, what the heck is the weight? After I'm done cooking it, it says it's the dry weight, but I'm not going to eat it dry. It's simple. You triple the serving size. So if it's a 60 gram, for instance, dry weight oatmeal, you cook it, it's going to be about 180 grams. Some variation. You can actually add more water to things as long as it doesn't get soupy to where it's not edible to you, and maybe make it weigh a little more, or cook it a little drier and have it be a little less. But basically legumes, beans, lentils, and peas that are dry, and grain products that are dry that you cook, you take that dry weight and you triple it. That is the weight. For instance, if it's 50 grams uncooked, it'll be 150 grams, and you compare the calories and sodium to that weight. I just switched to sodium. It didn't even look like the slide changed, because it's virtually the same. Because of the fact that we need about 2,000 grams of food per day, and the general recommendation for sodium is 2,000 milligrams or less per day, it makes the assessment categories of low, medium, and high, and very high for sodium exactly the same as calories. So it's the same thing as calories. You look at the sodium, let's say that it's 290, and you compare it to the serving size. If it's 290 and you're talking about a whole entree that weighs 320 grams, well, the sodium is less than the serving size. That's not really going to be a sodium risk issue, because you're going to get pretty darn full for a relative small amount of sodium. The sodium at 290 is less than the serving size weight, typical for, by the way, a frozen entree. That's why I picked those numbers, or at least the healthier ones. Less than the serving size of 320. So it's not really a sodium issue as it relates to sodium risk, when the sodium is less than the weight of the food in grams. Medium, such like calories, when the sodium is above, but not double the serving size. So let's say you have another entree that weighs 320 grams. But the sodium in this case was 500 milligrams. It's not low and it's not high, it's medium. Now, if you got 2,000 milligrams in a day as a budget, you can have some things that are medium, high, or even very high. Because you've got a budget, you know how to work it through and balance things. Dilution is the solution, right? You might say, well, that small bag of chips with salt is my non-negotiable. But for the rest of it, I'm going to work on my Ezekiel bread, which has less sodium. I'm going to find a lower sodium cottage cheese. I'm going to find ways to cook with less salt, etc., etc. So it's not about extremism, it's about knowledge. Same thing goes with the high and very high categories, as explained in the calorie density zone. Okay? Now we get to looking at a label. Now let's apply our skills. So first one is, looking at this label with the arrows helping you, is this more of a calorie or sodium risk? Well, since the criteria are the same, the weight is the same, 130 grams, you see the calories are 210, the sodium's 390. Obviously, it's more of a sodium issue than a calorie issue. It's medium in terms of calorie density, and it falls right in that zone of high in the sodium density at triple the sodium versus the serving size. Okay? So medium calorie density, high sodium density. More of a sodium issue than a calorie issue. But could we have it despite being high in sodium? There's 2,000. Even if you have only 1,500 milligrams as your goal for sodium, you can budget this. So it's not about yes or no. It's about knowledge and how often, how much, and portion and frequency control wisdom rather than yes, no. So let's take a look at the newest labels that the FDA has approved. And we should be seeing these more and more, and how they actually make your life easier when it comes to label reading. You'll notice that the serving size section is where you find the weight. It's a lot bigger than the last one we just looked at. That's one nice thing about these new labels. You won't have to struggle as much. While the weight of the food in grams will still be in parentheses, you can see it's much bigger and it's bolder. Okay? So I'm putting arrows right to the first top two priorities when you're looking at labels. The calories, 230. In this case, where do we put that at? That's going to be in the very high calorie density zone, right? Because it is more than quadruple. The calories are more than quadruple the serving size, right? 55 times 4 is 220. So 230 is more than quadruple the serving size. So it's a very high calorie density food. I might guess that this could be something along the lines of, popcorn with a little oil. It's going to be my guess. But nevertheless, and a little bit of salt. But less of a sodium issue than a calorie issue. The sodium in this case is 160. So that falls basically in the high sodium density zone. So it's very high calorie density, high sodium density. But still, is it workable as a food? If it's one of your non-negotiables, I guess so. It's to shoot ahead a little bit, it's certainly not a saturated fat issue at only 1 gram. There's no cholesterol, so one of the criteria it certainly meets. It's not a thin liquid beverage, so there you go. But it's not particularly high in fiber, though not zero, as you'll see in just a moment. So nevertheless, it becomes your choice, but based on knowledge. Now we move into the fourth criteria of the 5. We're going to start with fiber. This criteria is really important because when we talk about the PF10, looking at protein and fiber together, you can't meet the PF10 criteria without meeting fiber first. We have to have a eating pattern that's high in fiber if it's going to be a truly healthy eating pattern. Okay? Now, where is the threshold for good fiber? At 2 grams for every 100 calories. If you remember from that previous label, it had 4 grams of fiber for 230 calories, right? At 230 calories, we're going to need a little bit more than 4 grams of fiber, at least 5, and that food would have been in the good zone for fiber. At 3 grams for 100 calories, you'll see some really great whole grain options, particularly beans, lentils, and peas. That's why you see them pictured there. All of them meet the great, or if you prefer, excellent criteria of 3 grams of fiber for every 100 calories. If you want to just get really basic, we would say, try to get at least 35 grams of fiber a day if you want to make it ultra simple. But some of us, when we're cutting calories, even though we know how to stay full on less calories, we're going to be able to, for instance, get full on 1,400 calories. At 1,400 calories, that 28 grams would be good for fiber. But nevertheless, if you just want to make it simple, look at the data and ask me to pigeonhole where is a threshold for fiber without calculating anything, 35 grams would be reasonable. Where are the best fiber sources? Remember, you're not going to see anything on here that has yogurt or ice cream. In other words, these added processed fibers we'll talk about in a little bit. We're talking about here foods that have the fiber naturally occurring intact inside them. Beans, lentils, peas, otherwise known as legumes. Broken record? Sorry, repetition is the mother of learning. Whole fruits and vegetables with the skin. 100% whole grains. Now some are processed grains. They're not high in sodium naturally, but for instance many cereals, a lot of bran flakes for instance out there will have high sodium because of the sodium added versus shredded wheat, which almost never has sodium added. Nevertheless, 100% whole grains, typically very, very good for fiber. And then tree nuts, peanuts, and seeds. Note that because of their high calorie density, they may not meet a criteria of good fiber, but nevertheless, we don't absorb all of the calories when we eat a whole nut or seed, but we get all of the fiber benefit. So if you remember with whole nuts and seeds, you probably only absorb 75% of the calories on the label. And they are a whole plant food, and though they're high in calorie density, I still have to emphasize that they are a source of fiber and other benefits, and they're chewy, and so they have some mitigation of their risks of high calories because of being a whole food and very chewy and high in fiber. Though they are typically high in fat. The type of fats are typically the healthier unsaturated versus the cholesterol-raising saturated fats. I forewarned you there's a lot of products out there trying to leverage the knowledge that fiber is beneficial by adding processed fibers. Sometimes it's for mouthfeel, sometimes it's for texture issues, sometimes it's frankly for those and or just to make the fiber number look better because they know that you believe fiber is healthy and they don't think that you know the difference between a processed versus a intact, healthy fiber naturally occurring in a food. Even the Weight Watchers Point Plus program is based in part on fiber content, and you might get fooled into thinking a food is healthier if it's got fiber, but use your noggin. If you see a yogurt, which is healthy for other reasons, and these processed fibers don't harm us, it's just they harm us only if we think that they're benefiting us more than they really are. So if you see a yogurt with fiber, is a yogurt a plant? Ice cream as well, and other foods that have even plant driven foods like some cereals where the fiber number is so high. Some, for instance, bars, some nutrition bars, protein bars like Quest have dramatically high fiber numbers that should just trigger you to wonder, wait a minute, is this driven by processed fiber where I really shouldn't give it the credit? And you're probably correct. What would you see if you look on the ingredients section when a fiber number is suspiciously high? You will see words like polydextrose or maltodextrin. These, for instance, used in ice creams. Again, not harmful, but just don't add the 4 or 5 grams of fiber to your PF10 or to your daily amount. Inulin, not to be confused with insulin. There's an S missing. Inulin is from chicory root. It's an extract of chicory root. Well, the irony is we don't want you to extract it from the root, Mr. Food Company. We want it to be intact. We don't want you to extract it, dry it, pulverize it into powder and sprinkle it on like magic dust and make us believe that it's the same as eating fruits and vegetables and beans and lentils. Oligosaccharides, that's what you would see in a Quest bar, for instance. Otherwise might be called prebiotic fiber. Well, all fiber are prebiotics. In other words, things that feed your healthy gut bacteria, but intact fibers from whole plant foods do far better and have far better evidence. Then there are 3 confusables, because you think oat, wheat, and corn fiber. Well, what's wrong with that? Not to be confused with oat bran, wheat bran, and corn bran. Those chunky pieces that if you stuck them in an ice cream would probably cause the ice cream not to sell. This instead is pulverized into dust, extracted fiber that's sprinkled on, as I said, this powder that's sprinkled on like magic dust. And so you have to understand that subtlety difference. Oat fiber is not oat bran, wheat fiber is not wheat bran, and corn fiber is not healthy corn bran. And then there's resistant starch. Resistant starch, again, a processed added starch. You can actually have resistant starch benefits, but it's more particularly in letting a starch cool. For instance, a baked potato that you cool in the refrigerator, the starch will be a little more resistant to digestion, and you may decrease some of the calorie absorption and improve a little bit of the benefit to your gut bacteria. Same with oatmeal, overnight oats that you go from cooked and hot into the refrigerator the next day. Some cross-linking of starches will occur. And remember that fiber is just an undigestible starch, so you can actually increase the natural content of resistant starch by cooling something that is high in, that has starch from the plant world and after cooking it, whether it's a baked potato, for instance, or it's a oatmeal. And then they can add resistant starch, and I put a asterisk there because there may be some evidence building for processed added resistant starches. But in the end of the day, all of these, even if they have some mild select benefit, don't have anywhere near the data behind them as fibers on whole plant foods. So here's an example of the Quest bar. You see the 17 grams of fiber compared to its about 200 calories. And remember that at 200 calories, at 3 grams of fiber for every 100 calories, we would say 6 grams would be really, great or excellent fiber. At 17 grams, your eyebrows should go up and go, And yes, sure enough, you're going to look on the ingredients list, and even though there's a little curve there, you can't see the O and the L and the I. That's oligosaccharides, and under the arrow is the word prebiotic fiber, by the way. So there you go. All right, this is not natural fiber that would be occurring, and so I'm not going to count this on my PF10 criteria or for this food or in my whole day of fiber gram counting. Now, that being said, I do want you to know how to figure out one of the best ways to identify foods that will keep you full longer on less calories and help you identify the quality of food by quickly assessing for processed low fiber carbs and fats. And that's the PF10, okay? PF10 criteria. So we're still in number 4. We've gone through fiber, and we've mentioned you can't meet this criteria of the PF10 where we're going to look at the protein and the fiber combined unless you have at least a good level of fiber. We don't want to just run this whole criteria on protein without fiber content. Food, by the way, that wonderfully meets it both almost all the time are beans, lentils, and peas, something we could probably all do better on. All right? This criteria is fairly simple. Now that we understand where processed fiber is, we're looking at healthy foods. You add, for instance, you're looking at shredded wheat, or you're looking at a whole meal, or you're looking at a whole day of food in your Chronometer, Lose It, MyFitnessPal app, whatever. You add the fiber and the protein together. Let's say it's 40 grams of fiber and 110 grams of protein. Okay? That together is 150. Okay? Simple. Next step is multiply that by 10. 1,500. Now you've got a number. The PF10 is 1,500. Just like comparing the calories to the weight of the food for getting full on less calories, you want to compare the calories to the PF10 now for staying full. And what number should the calories be? Well, we hope it's pretty darn close to the PF10. So if you've got a PF10 of 1,500 for the day, we hope your calories are pretty close to that. Maybe a little bit higher, but the PF10 should be, I believe, at least 75% of the calories. So if you had a PF10 of 1,500, 110 grams of protein, 40 grams of fiber added together, that's 150. You multiply it by 10, that's 1,500, that's your PF10. Your calories should be no higher than about 1,800 calories. Okay? In that case, 1,500 is about 75% of 1,800. What if your calories are much higher than your PF10? What does that tell you? Well, by definition, you must have a lot of low fiber, carbs, and fats. It's a great way to quality control what you're eating to make sure you're not engaging in the riskiest, typically the riskiest calories of all. Low fiber, carbs, and fats, typically driven by processed carbs and fats, are some of the most risky calories. And the PF10 helps you identify quickly if you're getting in too much of them. Because if your calories are way higher than your PF10, if your PF10 is in at least 75%, for instance, of your calories, the only thing that must be behind that is some type of low fiber, carbs, and fats, or alcohol. Any way you slice it, no pun intended, there's an excess calorie risk there, particularly in terms of calorie management for the best calories that will keep you full longer. It's just a guideline. It's not the 14th commandment, but it's something that's important for you to know and is unique to Reality Meets Science and a shortcut for those of you especially that like numbers. Okay? All right, so now we're going to look at PF10 and we're going to apply it to a label. Simple, okay? We've identified this is a very high fiber crust whole grain pizza. The fiber is real. We've got 9 grams of fiber. We add it to 13 grams of protein, which is driven by the whole grain and the cheese that's on the pizza as well. Can't remember if this had a little bit of tofu on it as well. I can't remember. Nevertheless, 9 grams of fiber, 13 grams of protein, added up together, 22, multiplied by 10. There's your PF10 of 220. And look at the calories, almost exactly the same as the PF10. In other words, it doesn't have a ton of extra calories over and above the PF10, meaning there is not a lot of low fiber carbs and fats involved in this pizza. This is an exceptional pizza. It was made by a company some time back, unfortunately, that went out of business, but you can make your own, for instance, pizza at home that would much more likely meet this criteria than a typical commercial pizza, right? Remember, you have to meet the fiber criteria to get the PF10 criteria met, but this clearly does. At 210 calories, at even 3 grams of fiber, for every 100 calories, we'd be looking at around 6 grams of fiber. Even if we were to say 7, it has 9. So this is a really very reasonable choice in terms of staying full. Its calorie density is not low. It's more in the medium and even maybe closer to maybe even high end of medium. Not quite the high calorie density zone, but solidly in the medium, upper end of medium zone. So maybe we started off with a salad, or you finish it off with some whole fruit, or both. And by the end of that meal, totaling everything, thinking dilution is the solution, you've got both calorie density and PF10 met. And boom, you are full on less calories. Both got full on less calories and stayed full on less calories. All right, so we're going to sum up here with an assessment of all 5 of the criteria when you're looking at a label, so we can quickly kind of identify where food fits, right? We've identified this is not a thin liquid beverage calorie. Criteria number 1 is met. Then you're going to go in to look at the calories and the sodium, 1 and 2 you see on the list, and look quickly at the weight of the food. We already know this food fits in the medium calorie density zone and the high sodium density zone. Doesn't mean don't have, it just means, okay, now I know where that is going to fit in terms of my budget for those 2 issues. Right? Then number 3, looking at saturated fat. That criteria is really simple. Remember, it's 10 grams per day on average or less that we're looking for to help the liver be a liver cleaning and cholesterol excreting machine. We want the liver to be able to clean the blood of cholesterol. It does that best when not exposed to lots of saturated fat. And of course, many of us hyperabsorb cholesterol itself, so we're looking at cholesterol, typically less than 200 milligrams per day, despite what you've heard, is a great goal for the mass majority, and for many of us, even getting to less than that on many days, if not all, as we discussed in the previous lesson on fats and cholesterol, to less than 100 milligrams might be even a reasonable option on many days. So with that in mind, saturated fat and cholesterol are extremely simple because there's no calculation involved. It's just an absolute amount. 10 grams of saturated fat. Some days will go above, but preferably 90-95% of the time you'll be below that. And that's plenty to have a little bit of this or that, whether it's cheese or otherwise, as well as cholesterol at around 200 milligrams or less per day is not a zero tolerance approach. And there are many days you'll find yourself being able to get to 100, maybe even less than 50 milligrams on some days of cholesterol. All right? Now, last but not least, you wrap it up with the PF10. You say, okay, now I know I've got this food as a moderate calorie density. It's not going to really get me full ideally, but maybe it's a keep me full food. And you'd be right. Again, 13 grams of protein, 9 grams of fiber. You haven't seen any fake fiber on the list. You've got a food that's got a great PF10 criteria. So it's got a good stay full characteristic. It's moderate on the calorie density, so you might want to add some fruit at the end, or add some more vegetables on top of this, or a salad in the beginning to address the calorie density issue. You would also address, by the way, the sodium by doing that, adding the fruits and vegetables, the fruit for dessert at the end, or adding some vegetables on top of the pizza, or even having a salad prior that doesn't have a dressing with a whole ton of salt. I love vinegar, for instance, balsamic vinegar, maybe a little touch of oil, but even then, a lot of times just balsamic vinegar by itself does the trick, and you'd be addressing both calorie and sodium. Okay? You already have the numbers for saturated fat and cholesterol, pretty simple and straightforward. And then you've got the wonderful trick and tool, if you will, of the PF10 criteria. And that way you can absolutely, and then once you get good at this, easily find where foods fit in your plan without extremism and know where your risks are, whether they're worthy risks, and how you can, dilution is the solution, balance them out in other ways so that you have a lifestyle rather than a diet. Okay? I hope you enjoyed that session.